So I'm cooking, and it's ending up too sweet, I'm tasting. What can I do to counter that? Now, that's not a word. I'm not looking for particular things, but flavors that might counterbalance other flavors. And again, it's not a glass that I'm looking for or something like that. It's a vague sort of thing. So I wonder how you deal with that.
Stephen, can I ask you, if I may? So language and thought have a relationship. They're not independent, but what is thought? What is thought if it's not language? And yeah, what is it? An easy one for you.
It's information representations in the brain that take a number of forms. There isn't a single thing that thought consists of. There's abstract thought, as which I refer to as the gist or content, and that can be modeled as a set of propositions that don't necessarily correspond to words in a particular language, but indicate the relationship of who did what to whom, what is where in something like a logical format. There are visual images that are from a particular vantage point that represent visible surfaces. There's a more abstract spatial thought where we have a sense of the terrain around us at different scales. There's probably thought that consists of motor sequences, as when we imagine what it's like to tie our shoes. So the brain is a complex place. There's a lot going on in there. There are inputs from many senses. Each one of them probably has short-term traces or representations that we can activate on the short term. They leave longer-term traces which can be interconnected in various ways, so that you can name something that you can also visualize, and you can imagine, if it's, say, food, what it tastes like, or if it's a physical object, how to heft it. These are all interconnected. So thought, needless to say, I mean, this is an understatement, thought is a very complex set of phenomena, but all of which consist of patterns of information in the brain. Now, they are also, we often individuate thoughts in terms of what they represent in the world, and there's a philosophical literature on how the mental representations, the data structures in the brain relate to entities in the world, obviously mediated through our senses, but not just consisting of particular sensations. But in general, and perhaps this is what Hilary was referring to, but because there is a world, things do tend to hang together. Things that are that have four legs and fur and bark also lift their legs at hydrants. That's not everything goes equally often with everything else in the world. But as we're children, as we learn things, we tend to soak up the intercorrelations among things in the world. And those intercorrelations are there for a reason. Namely, there is a world. There really are dogs out there. And some of our concepts, like the concept of dog, which can be mapped onto the sound dog if you're an English speaker, as well as a bunch of other words for species of dog, breeds of dog, that is, that therefore have a systematic relationship to things in the world. And as Hilary noted, it's not one-to-one, because we can conceptualize anything in the world at different levels of abstraction. A hunk of flesh in the world we can think of as a living thing, as an animal, as a mammal, as a dog, as a German Shepherd, as my German Shepherd Fido. These are all different representations, but they all correspond to the same thing in the world, and they have a coherence because there are things in the world that do tend to hang together. The world is not a kaleidoscope of shimmering pixels where anything can correlate with anything else, but the patterns that impinge on our sense organs have a statistical structure because they emanate from things in the world that obey the laws of physics and biology.
Stephen, thank you. And Hilary, just sort of picking up on a couple of those points, but when you were speaking, you dangled the dream that closure could be infinite. We could hold things in a myriad of different ways, and maybe it's just the customary ways that we cling on to. But Stephen's sort of saying, well, no, actually there is an outer limit, like that lump of flesh that's cocked its leg against a lamppost. There really is, you are going to run up against a boundary at some point, even though language might furnish you with many generous ways that you could describe that and still be understood. So would you accept that? Are there outer limits to closure?
Well, there are certainly ones that don't work very well,
Yeah.
And which we are therefore disinclined to use, and we're not going to, if somebody puts forward an account of things and we think, well, I can't make any sense of that, I can't hold the world like that, we're not going to buy into it. So there is constraint, absolutely there is constraint on closure, but I would be hesitant of words like representation, that language is representing some ultimate things out there. As I said, I don't think you can find an example of a thing out there that's just that thing and isn't something else. And science has exactly tried to find those things and not been able to find them. And that's because they're not there. The identities come from language and from thought. They're not out there that we name. And of course, the underlying point that you're making, which I think is absolutely profound one, and for me has been the primary question, which is, well, why the hell it is then that these closures, these identities, why do they work if they're not representing the stuff out there? And I think that is an absolutely fundamental point. And indeed, the framework that I put forward is primarily designed to try and answer that question. But I would argue you don't need our identities, don't need the validation that they are describing some ultimate stuff in order to work. And just one example of that would be, the Aristotelian Ptolemaic system provided an account of the way that the stars and the planets worked. It was utterly different from us. We regarded as total nonsense, stars carried on celestial spheres. It was incredibly accurate. It lasted for 2,000 years. They produced tables when Copernicus came along. He didn't think that he was going to be able to produce anything more accurate. So you don't need truth to get a model or a closure to work. It works by you refining it in order to enable it to be useful.
And actually, that's a really good point to move on to our first theme, because Hilary's raised a bit of a provocation. Science, the history of science, has been known to favour different kind of languages to describe things. We've already mentioned the Copernican revolution, Galileo, obviously Einstein a bit closer. So Barbara, I mean, does the history of science suggest that sometimes language has played more of an important part in how scientists view the world than perhaps maybe has been suggested so far?
So science often it departs from language and goes to mathematics. So, and other kinds of models, the Copernican model of things rotating around other things, and that's not exactly verbal. It's another kind of model that seems to fit what is happening. So even those sorts of ways of explaining scientific phenomena don't necessarily rest on language as we think of it. I'm also thinking, in response to Hilary, there are a lot of vague concepts. So I'm cooking, and it's ending up too sweet, I'm tasting. What can I do to counter that? Now, that's not a word. It's a general concept that might include a lot of things that I might do. And cooking is an example where I'm looking for ingredients often, and it's again not words. I'm not looking for particular things, but flavors that might counterbalance other flavors. And again, it's not a glass that I'm looking for or something like that. It's a vague sort of thing. So I wonder how you deal with that.
So I would agree with you in the sense that it clearly is the case that there are some ways of holding the world that are more effective than others. And if you're cooking, you might get some advice from someone. So hold it like this. If you put it together like this, you'll have a better outcome. I don't think that they necessarily have to imply, as you say, precise identities in the way that that's conveyed, if that's the point you're making to me. But there is constraint. You know, if they say, well, try it like this and it comes out rubbish, then you think, well, no, I don't think this is a very good way of holding the world, frankly. I'm going to carry on with the way that I was thinking of it previously.
So supposing I'm organizing a team, either at work or a team playing frisbee or volleyball, and I want to balance my players. Again, that's a kind of thought. I'm thinking of each of their skills. It's not something I can easily verbalize, but I can think about how I would balance, how I would put players on the field. It's, again, not easily coded into...
I agree with that entirely, which is why I said at the beginning, I don't think language exhausts thought. It's not as if we have to stick with these identities. I think we do generate identities that are not linguistic. It's very hard to refer to them. I mean, you did very well in a way of describing how we might think of it, but it's very hard to refer to them because we use language. So how do you get at these non-linguistic way of thinking? But I would use very similar parallels to the one that you do. You know, if you're a musician and you're making up a tune, you don't think, oh, I'm going to play, you know, D sharp next. You're just in the mode, you're in the flow. And so I think you do have ways of closing the world that aren't linguistic. Of course, we have to use language to describe that. So there is a sort of puzzle quite about how we go about that. But absolutely, I think there are ways of creating intersensory closure, as I put it, that are not linguistic. And the 20th century language philosophy, I think a lot of it got that wrong. It somehow imagined the only thing you could do was think about the world in terms of language.
Stephen, could I bring you in? So earlier, Hilary was saying, like, largely agreeing with your point, like language can give us a lot more precise information about the kind of thing that we're talking about. But then Hilary said, but the idea that there is an ultimate thing in the world is wrong. It doesn't, that's not true. What do you think? I mean, is language, you know, can language refer to an ultimate thing? Is there an ultimate thing that language can grasp for us?
I'm not sure what ultimate thing means, but are there things in the world?
Yeah, things in the world. Perfect.
There are things in the world, and you know, a lot of them have names, and when they don't, we expand the language to name things that previously did not have names. Now, there is, of course, intersensory closure, but if one's curious, why can there be intersensory closure? Why is it that if something has a shape like that's concave and you put water in, the water doesn't spill out? Well, it's because there is a glass and the glass has certain properties and it obeys certain laws. And why is the set of intercorrelated sensations that we call a glass, why do they happen to correlate? Well, one ought to be curious as to why some things correlate and others don't. So we can call it a glass. We wouldn't call it a hamster because it doesn't have that particular set of intercorrelated sensations. And the most parsimonious explanation, the one that is amply confirmed by every test that we make, is there are things out in the world. And science absolutely assumes there are things in the world. I happen to have a copy of a magazine called Science in my lap. And the cover story is about roses, about the mathematics that govern the formation, the shape of rose petals, not the same as what makes petals of a daisy or a tulip. And that's because there are roses out there. And science absolutely makes ontological commitments, not out of stubborn habit, but simply because it's the best explanation for all of the intercorrelated sensations that you can call closure. They close for a reason, namely there are things out there that in which various properties hang together, and that's why so many of our sensations tend to go together.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.